Hey, welcome. Scott Lindon here. This is the Upland Nation podcast. So glad you could be joining me. I know it's a busy time of year. Yeah, we'll talk about that among other things. So stick around. We'll be going into the uplands in one of my favorite states, Kansas. Yeah, this is when you finalize that big trip of the year, and I'm going to give you some reasons to take a look at something other than a state that starts with north or south. I'll give you a guidebook, some good spots, tactics, some tales from my own dozen or so visits. But that's not all. In our Handle It segment, we'll be talking about other things you can do with your e-collar that might make your life a little bit simpler, your dogs as well. And we'll learn what you shot in September if you were lucky enough to get out early. So cover all of that, and who knows what else. A rabbit hole or two may just appear, and we'll probably go down it. It's all made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, TrulockChokes Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, Purina, ProPlan Sport Dog Food, LandTrust.com, and HiViz Shooting Systems. Well, the chukar and quail season, well, hun season, pheasant season, everything opened here in the West last weekend, and I was there. Yep. Didn't go to my usual opening spot. It happened to be the one best place to watch that, what do they call it, the annular eclipse? It's not a total eclipse, but you can see the rim of the sun around the outline of the moon. Well, everybody was there, so we went somewhere else. Once again, I was reminded that there are many things that make a great hunt, including a great campfire at the end of the day, kind of like a magnet. You know, you hear the term moths to flame. Well, humans do the same thing, and that's a good outcome. Everyone and every dog stayed healthy. The bird numbers are looking good. I'll have more on that as we get deeper into the season, and so stand by. But, last couple weeks I've been asking people on social media and also on my Upland Nation Insights newsletter, if you got to hunt in September, what did you shoot at the most? And I'm fascinated by the answers. Of course, the number one response, the highest number of folks were out there shooting at doves of one sort or another. Almost 40% of you who were in the hunting mode in September did that. Number two on the list, forest grouse. Yeah, a lot of that, 24% all told. Prairie grouse, another 12%. Woodcock, another 4%. Teal hunters, yeah, 4%. And then there are a few places to hunt chukars early in the season. Well, you're a better man than I, and I hope your dog survived, but 3% of you were out doing that. Glad to hear it. Then just for fun, I asked if you were hunting at all. One of the answers was ammo. What are you looking for? Yep, 14% of you are still looking for ammo. So, good luck on that. Well, we'll be into the whole Kansas thing in just a moment. First, a word from Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. I shot pretty well again. Yeah, and I give everybody at Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School the credit for that. All the instructors are hunters. They know what works on the range and in the field, and that's important. And so it might be worth your while after, an opening weekend that didn't go quite as well as you thought. If you're heading through or you live in western Northwest, Western Oregon in particular, take a look at midvalleyclays.com, maybe schedule a lesson. And I'll tell you, in one lesson, you'll find something that you can work on that will probably add a bird to your bag. It has for me. And if you're shopping for a new gun, remember midvalleyclays.com is sub-gauge central, 20s, 28s, 410s, always in stock. So check them out, midvalleyclays.com. And Sage and Breaker, gun cleaning and care, transport, and other ways to just give your firearms some TLC. I'm resolved to do that better. As I mentioned a week or two ago, I've got all my sage and breaker stuff in the truck so that I will use it. It's right there, accessible. You know, I open the drawer where I put my shotguns. That's where all my stuff is, reminding me to at least run the 3-in-1 bore cleaning system through my shotgun barrels. If I got a little more time, I'll do a little bit more, including a little spritz of the CLP, but it's all right there and handy. And I do all that on my Sage and Breaker gun cleaning mat. Don't forget to sign up for the mailing list. You'll get first word on future sales and new products. It's all at sageandbreaker.com. So let's take a little trip. If you watch my show, Wing Shooting USA, you know I love Kansas for a bunch of reasons. Former Governor Sam Brownback, a lifelong hunter, has had me out for his invitational pheasant hunt several times. Got to know a lot of the other folks in that world. That is a great event, by the way, if you ever can make time for the Kansas Governor's Invitational Pheasant Hunt, make sure you do. And the good news there is the season opens a little later, but it's just like any other more southerly state. You don't really want to be chasing birds in the heat, and so check the season start out there, and then take a look at that governor's hunt, among other things. But Kansas has so much going for it. I've been there, like I said, about a dozen times. From the very first Cast and Blast episode I did back before a high definition, through many of the Fur Feathers Friends events, and a lot of times just for fun, passing through or visiting friends and staying for a while. I want to focus on Kansas because we've looked at South Dakota. We will look at North Dakota. But I know Kansas a little bit better than some people, and I've had some positive experiences, and I do believe that it is a great alternative to North Dakota or South Dakota. So let's just go for a little adventure in Kansas. We'll jump around on the map. We'll get some stories, some hard information, techniques and tactics, all right here on the Upland Nation podcast. Let's start near Atkinson. Yeah, we'll look it up on the map. The whole state has public access ground of one sort or another. They have a very well-developed walk-in hunting program. They call it WEHAW, Walk-In Hunting Access. And I've had the pleasure of hunting with the guys who administer that, and they've showed me a few ins and outs. And if you don't have your Onyx or some other online mapping app, do get one, because that will help you in accessing all of those places. You also can get yourself a hard copy of their atlas and a few other things. And in fact, now's a good time to remind you that their resources are all available at ksoutdoors.com. So check them out there. But we were near Atkinson a while back, and it was bizarre in some ways, and wonderful and rewarding in other ways. We were driving down an old dirt road out in the middle of nowhere, and the night before they'd had a bit of a snowfall, which, you know, doesn't happen early in the season very often down there, but it did, but only on one side of the road. Yeah, while the sun was gleaming off that snow on the south side of the road, the north side of the road, for some reason, was bare. And that was a good thing, because that's where we were going. That was the property we had received permission to hunt. And it was a little bit of everything, a mixed bag of knee-high CRP grasses. There was a shelter belt in the distance. There was some soybean fields and a lot of wheat. Now, the wheat had been cut, but everything else was still standing, and it was all ours. Yeah, we headed off into the bare ground, and this was an organic farm, so there was a goodly number of overgrown ditches, weedy spots, a little bit of what they just call dirty farming. Uh, Ultimately, though, that is probably the best thing that ever happened to that piece of property. It was probably not going to pay off from a farming standpoint, but from a farming plus a hunting standpoint, it was we hit the jackpot. We walked that whole place. In fact, we probably looped through it twice. It wasn't that big, probably 300, 400 acres, maybe right in there. Over the course of time, we walked a shelter belt that, we jumped whitetails out of that shelter belt. Let's just say I was rather surprised when the great horned owl flushed in front of me and my dog. And we did get a few birds out of there. Most of them, of course, go the wrong way. When you're on the right, they're flying out the left and vice versa. Here's a lesson I learned out of that. And I've talked about this briefly once or twice, but maybe not in regards to a shelter belt. A lot of those shelter belts are just one or two rows of some kind of conifer, depending on where you are. And we don't do this as often as we should, but next time I'm there or any place like that, I'm going to vote that we put a blocker at the end of that shelter belt because, we're 80, 100, 200 yards from the end and watching many of the birds squirt out that far end because they've run the whole way trying to stay ahead of the dogs, trying to stay ahead of us, and nobody's there to stop them. So a blocker on a shelter belt, just like in South Dakota sometimes, worth a try. That's not all, though. We probably jumped 60 birds on top of all that, plus a cottontail here or there. It was a lot of fun, and it worked out for us. The real key to that was covering all that ground very carefully. We had 3 or 4 dogs on the ground at all times, and in that big CRP stuff, all the better, because birds can skulk out real easily unless you've got them basically surrounded. Now, the Sunflower State has a lot to offer traveling hunters. A variety of terrain, diverse crops, a lot of bird species. We'll talk about that. And in my book, some of the things that are truly important, especially later in the season. Warmer weather, bigger bag limits. Yeah, you can shoot 4 ringnecks a day. And a non-resident license that's good for a whole year, 365 days. So you buy that license, you can use it that season and all the way up to the day before next season. Yeah, what a bargain. On top of that, you probably won't do what we did one year. We were out there, I think it was for Governor's Hunt. I'm not even positive. Yeah, it was. The week before, the state had had an earthquake, a tornado, and a blizzard. But by the time we got there, everybody was just fine and willing to host us for that hunt and for a few days of fun hunting afterwards. So that's kind of a compliment to the resiliency of Kansas residents. I've always had a good time there, and the small communities that support the hunting world are eager to have you. I'll talk more about those as we get into the story about our trips to Kansas. 1.5 million acres of publicly accessible hunting land through the Walk-in Hunting Access Program, and that's not counting all the federal and state ground on top of that. So get yourself a good hunting atlas from the state or get their app and find a colored spot on the map and drive to it. Among the species you can hunt in the uplands, ringnecks, bobwhites, greater prairie chickens, and every once in a while a little surprise. We'll talk about that as well. But number one, it's all about access. Their walk-in program controls and then administers so much great land. And for some reason, it is, by and large, a little bit better than a lot of other places. The guys who administer it, I know they're conscientious. They know what we're looking for. They're bird hunters too. So they're picking and choosing, and they are high grading the walk-in hunting access. And it pays off for everybody, especially for us. I'll never forget one trip. We were doing one hunt with them. This is for the TV show. And we parked on a spot, wide spot in the road, and we're going to hunt that area over there. It's got a little of everything, and that's the joy of Kansas. It had a bunch of timber. It had ditches. It had cut crops. It had standing crops. It had this thicket of, what is that? Well, I think it's a berry of some sort. I can't remember now, but whatever it is, the first thing they told me when I got there was, don't ever drive past one of those. Do not ignore the berry thickets. So we didn't. But while we were getting all our gear together, I looked around and Flick's gone. I look here, I look there, and look up. Oh, there he is on point alongside one of those thickets. So we drop everything, drag the whole flying circus of cameras and gunners, and sure enough, first bob white of the season right there. Boy, he was very young at the time. I gotta conclude the story. So that bird dropped farther into the thicket, and nobody could find it. He was working at it. We sent a Labrador in there. We probably sent somebody else's pointer. Yeah, we had another wire hair that looked just like Flick, in fact. Nobody. So, we're about to give up when we hear this. And then here comes Flick. He had dug under a fallen log, grabbed that bird and brought it back. You ever had that happen? Yeah, it's so gratifying. My first dog did that with a rough grouse many years ago, and it's just amazing how their noses will work and their instincts, their prey drive. I'm Scott Lindon. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast, just kind of reminiscing on some of my trips to Kansas in hopes that you'll take a look at it as an alternative to some of the mob scenes you get in other states. All sorts of reasons for it, including the wonderful, charming town of Osborne, Kansas. Yeah, the mayor's a bike mechanic. The citizenry welcomes hunters. It's also surrounded by weehaw ground, plum thickets. That's what it is, plum thickets. Next to pastures. That's where the bob whites can be. They're the wildest bobs I've ever seen. And knock wood, every year I get to hunt a few of those somewhere. We have had such a great time in small towns like that. One of the few towns left that has a Boy Scout lodge. You remember the days when all the Boy Scout troops had their own building in a cool place? They still have one. We had fun in Osborne that trip, hunting everything from stubble to oak woodlands, I guess, swales with high grass, and then those high spots on the cut grain fields sometimes held pheasants, but they were usually down in the ditches along the road. Got plenty of misses out of those, but still had a wonderful time. If you're thinking about a new destination, Osborne, Kansas might be on your list. I would suggest it at least. You never know what else might rise from that ditch if you send your spaniel in there. They love what they're doing, and so do the folks out there. The more reliable quail populations are further in southeast from Osborne. No matter where you go, you might find a pheasant. There's another type of quail. I'm saving that one for later. And, yeah, once in a while, there used to be greater prairie chickens. We won't dwell on that. There's a long story there. We don't want to deal with that. But they're a little bit harder to find and quite often threatened in one way or another. Pheasants, of course, the premier bird. But you can find pheasants and sometimes even quail in some of these other places. That Dodge City area, they've always been good to us, great programs of various sorts from the high school football team. Thanks, Coach, for your hospitality, to the Chamber of Commerce. Jetmore, another nearby town that has lots going for it, including Horse Thief Reservoir. Maybe you saw that on the Wing Shooting USA episode a while back. Incredible reservoir. The communities banded together to create that water source for all the reasons you create water sources in the 20th century. Back then, they needed water for irrigation, for their use in municipal areas, and it's created some incredible wild bird habitat. They're still experimenting with it, which is kind of cool, and Josh Hobbs is a good guy in managing all of that. But they do have pheasants, and they do have an incredible amount of habitat diversity. Prairies to CRP. Milo, yeah, even Milo that you can walk through. Corn, weedy shorelines. Maybe you saw that incredible water retrieve that Manny gave me on a ringneck right on that peninsula that goes out into the reservoir. It was incredible. Also good public access at Atkinson. I talked about that. Goodland and Norton, which have been the site of the governor's hunt in past years. All sorts of access out there, mainly for ringnecks. We hunted one spot. A lot of old homesteads out there. We hunted one. We put the flushing dogs on the ground for this one because it was, wow, the place was so old that it had trees growing out of it. And it was thick, and there was all sorts of stuff in the way. So we put the little dogs out and held our breath, and all of a sudden, right at the foundation of that old building, 3 roosters jumped. 3 different directions, 3 different shots. Everybody took credit on one or the other of the birds. Yeah, walked across the street to a cut cornfield, found pheasants hunkering in the down stalks. There was a beautiful nearby draw. I pushed first by a coyote, so we just watched as all the birds flew like kind of popcorn going out. And learned a lesson there as well. I've used this ever since. If you're walking even a small field, but a big field for sure, don't have enough people to put blockers at one end and drivers at the other. One of the drivers ought to volunteer every once in a while to swing wide outside the field, trot down to the, maybe 50 yards ahead and become a blocker right in there for a while. Sometimes that will pay off without having to go all the way down to the end and be bored for 3/4 of the hunt. It's paid off for me in Oregon. It's paid off for me on chuckers in a riparian zone, and also on ringnecks in Kansas, among other places. So that's something I learned, the hard way, frustrating hard way, I guess I'd call it. Finally putting 2 and 2 together. Maybe you've already come up with that one. I don't know, but it's worth a look. Now, I've given the quail kind of second billing here, mainly because we're all after those gaudy, colorful ringnecks quite often. But western Kansas has a lot of states that might rank higher on your bucket list. Bobwhites in many places, growing bird populations, and great terrain and habitat. Southeast Kansas is the hotbed for bobwhites. Northeast comes in a close second, but almost anywhere that there's good habitat, you might find a few birds. Like I said, the bumper sticker in Kansas says, "Find a plum thicket and you'll find quail." It's sort of almost true. If you're looking for a mixed bag, it's southwest Kansas. The bobs are a pleasant surprise on a rooster hunt. You might start in places like the Spring River Wildlife Area. That's near Crestline. And Copan Wildlife Area, same general area. If you're in central Kansas, the Caw Wildlife Area and Slate Creek Wetland Wildlife Area near Oxford will give you the chance at a mixed bag a little bit more quail than pheasants. And one that I am intrigued by, haven't had a lot of time to spend there, but Fort Riley is exactly that. It's an Army base, but it does offer public access for both pheasants and quail. Got to jump through a few hoops, but I understand why. Definitely worth a look. Fort Riley is, it's up there on the list for my next trip. Now, if you go further south, like we did an episode of Cast and Blast there a million years ago, and I'll never forget. It was so funny when we talked to the guy we were going to hunt with. He said, "Well, you can fly into Texas or you can fly into Oklahoma, and then you got to rent a car and you got to drive to this one." I'm thinking, well, where the heck are we? We're going to hunt in Kansas. But yeah, right in that corner there, take a look at the map. Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas right there. Scaled quail in the lowest latitudes of the state down there. We walked over what was the Cimarron River, but at that point it had gone underground. So back in the day, Kit Carson was walking the same ground. Now we were, kind of slipping and sliding our way through the deep sand that had been a riverbed a long time ago, and had a lot of fun. There were lots of scalies, and there were a lot of wild pigs. There were also a lot of sandburrs, but you learn to live with that in whatever way you prefer. Boots on your dogs or find another place nearby. All of those things made that a kind of a memorable hunt, walking in the moccasin footsteps of Kit Carson. It was worth the sandburr headaches. You have to ask my old guy, Buddy, about that, but we had a good time. His paws, well, they recovered fairly quickly. A lot of times, those cotton tops will run rather than fly, so sometimes a flushing dog is a better strategic alternative than our pointers, who looked at us and wondered why we weren't up there yet trying to flush those birds. Yeah, you're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Lindon. We're continuing our tour of Kansas very soon. We'll also talk about other ways to use your e-collar to your advantage in the field. Some interesting things that I've learned in the last couple of years. I'll be talking more about them on a video soon. It's all coming up right after this word from TrulockChokes.com. They got a choke tube for just about anything. I think the last time I talked to Scott Trulock, he said they make 2,000 different choke tubes. Well, somewhere in that pile is the one you need. Put the right choke tubes in, well manufactured, the right materials, the right engineering. You're probably going to shoot better. Yeah, you are. So consider swapping out your factory chokes for some well-made TrulockChokes. That's TRULOCK chokes.com. And I'm fueling my dog flick with Purina Pro Plan Sport. There's a formula for just about any dog at any point in their life, designed for active, hard-working dogs. ProPlansport.com is where you learn more about those formulations. 20% fat, 30% protein, that is the right balance to fuel metabolic needs and maintain lean muscle. That's what we want. And real meat, of course, is the first ingredient. Learn more at ProPlansport.com. Welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast. Scott Lindon here. We're touring Kansas, one of my favorite states, if you hadn't figured that out yet. Hospitality, great habitat, wonderful people. Oh, yeah, and a few birds here and there. I'm still trying to get back with all you firefighters who invited me to Western Kansas. I will do that at some point in time. Thank you for the invitation. I mentioned prairie chickens. I'm just going to touch on them a little bit because, they are getting beat up. Now, the lesser prairie chickens are pretty much off the list We were there the last year you could hunt them, and we actually did try. The wind was blowing so hard, we finally gave up. Yeah, I mean, it was just crazy. We flew a few pheasants, believe it or not, but we never found a lesser. Now, the graders are still available. You want to be careful about where you're going. You want to know more about their habitat. Check the regulations. Depending on where you are, they may or may not be available. Yeah, and here's my plug for South Dakota. If that's really what you want, maybe you ought to go to South Dakota for your prairie chicken. But if you are bound and determined, early in the season, you hunt them just like you do sharptails everywhere else. You roam that country in the Flint Hills and the Smoky Hills with pointers. You find small coveys and singles, and in the breaks at parallel streams in the northwest and west central Kansas areas, there may be birds as well. Now, in the late season, it's kind of a pass shooting game. I don't know much about how that works, and I wouldn't do it anyway. I can't sit still, but check carefully on where you can and can't hunt prairie chickens, and then good luck to you. Send me a picture if you get one. We've had some real fun, luckily being taken by other people who know the country real well, but sometimes just exploring on our own over the years. Goodland, Kansas is good. They got a real hunting heritage there. They're glad to have us. And on top of that, there's some pretty good hunting ground. There's a lot of places where these rolling hills create little, for lack of a better term, amphitheaters. And there's a little more moisture at the bottom of those bowls, so the cover's a little bit better. You can run a dog from the top down into the bottom, and maybe he'll find something there. They may fly, they may run till they get to the skinnier cover towards the top. Whichever way, just know that going in. In fact, I talked about blockers a few minutes ago. There's another opportunity to put a blocker somewhere on the high ground, so that when your dog busts a bird out that keeps running instead of flying, maybe they'll see that blocker skyline on the top of the knoll, and they'll fly instead. But in this case, that was Manny. I had Manny with me at the time, and we were down heading into one of those bowls when he kind of just I've heard the term cat dancing. You know what that is? When they just kind of slow and they pick their feet up a little higher, and then poof, they just stop. We had all the time in the world. I even said, "Hey, Lynn, bring your camera over here. Tad, how about right over there? That way when I shoot that bird, it'll be right between you." Yeah, nice try. The bird got up. I missed the safety on the gun mount, and the bird flew away unscathed. But we still had a good time, and that was just the first of many birds we found in places like that. There's always something to challenge you, whether it's the wind, the weather, or the bad shooting. We found him later that day, and Manny finally did get a retrieve on that same bird. And I know it's the same bird because we tracked it as it flew over the knoll. Lynn was on the top with his camera. He marked it down with the camera, and we went right over there and worked that bird through a irrigated field that finally paid off for us. Another day, we were just a few dozen miles away. It was pretty quiet, and we were, kind of showcasing a couple new women hunters who, they were very experienced hunters. They just never hunted birds before. And my goal was to put them into a bird or two. Come on, everybody. And it was not working. So we ended up at lunch talking to some guys who had a family farm down the road, and they were growing sunflowers. Yeah, it's the sunflower state. In fact, there's a monumental sculpture of a painting easel. You know what an easel is, with Van Gogh's sunflower painting on it. You got to see that. It's right out there. So anyway, they said, "Yeah, come on with us. Well, let's hunt those sunflower fields." And they had a bunch of big labs, so we left all the pointers in there, and we got at one end, we had a couple of blockers at the other end, and we walked and walked and walked. And then the seed heads started rattling in front of us. And then the dogs started getting really happy. And then the roosters would break out of those sunflowers. You know, and it's like playing maracas, if you know if you know what those are. Yeah, musical instrument, you know, that shaker thing. That's what the birds sounded like as they get up. The first couple wing beats hit those seed heads, the sunflower seed heads, and the stalks, and they just rattle like that. Out of all of that, Julie got her first bird and was so grateful to finally shoot a flying pheasant. It was worth all the hard work. That ringneck dropped like a stone. One of the chubby chocolate labs brought it back to her. How do they keep track of that? And everybody high-fived, hugged, and then shed a tear. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was, it made the day. But you know how that is. You know, most of us are really excited about helping newcomers join the team, as it were. So think about doing that as well. Kansas is a great place to do it. That is kind of the short version of my wonderful ode to Kansas. You cannot go wrong. Learn more about them at ksoutdoors.com. It's a no-brainer. I mean, if you're looking for a place to go that has a longer season, warmer season, bigger bag limit, and a real bargain when it comes to a non-resident license, you cannot beat it. Some of the things you need to know, like I said, their season doesn't open until mid-November, but it runs to January 31st, and the weather late in the season for ringnecks is pretty good. You can start hunting prairie chickens if you choose in mid-September through the end of January. Pheasant limit is 4 a day, 16 in possession. Quail aggregate of all species, 8 per day, 32 in possession. Yeah, always worth a look. Non-resident license, about $100 right around there. And all sorts of requirements that you might want to be careful of if you want to hunt Fort Riley. You got to have a hunter ed card. So if you're born after July 1st, 1957, and you haven't taken your hunter ed course, you probably ought to work on that. You ought to be careful about heat early in the season for your dog. I've never seen a rattlesnake, but I'm told they are there. I doubt you'll ever need snowshoes. And it's worth a look if you're searching for an alternative to those other great states, no matter where they are. There's some great ones out there, and Kansas ought to be on that list as well. I'll be talking about other ways to use your e-collar right after this. We're brought to you in part by PointerShotguns.com. They did right by me on opening weekend. I have had a great time with the new side-by-sides. I have one with a nickel silver receiver and one with case coloring on it. They all have a 7-year warranty. They're all beautifully made. The fit and finish is remarkable, especially at the price point. No matter what you're looking for, they probably have something for you. Go to PointerShotguns.com and shop around. Find a nearby retailer, and then go take a close-up look at one. The best I can remind you. These are guns that they punch well above their weight. Last year at Pheasant Fest, I cannot think of anybody who was not pleasantly surprised when they took one off the rack and put it to their shoulder and then looked closely at the fit and finish. They now have a 28 gauge case colored over and under. They got youth guns. Learn more at PointerShotguns.com. and outfit the rest of your hunt at midwayusa.com. I know I do. They really do have just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors. I've told you about some of the things I bought. You might be surprised. So give them a look. Just go to the search bar and look for the things that you want and see if they have them. From ammo to apparel to camping gear of all sorts. And you'll save 10% off your next order if you sign up for email or text notifications. So put your list together, sign up, and take 10% off your next order at midwayusa.com. I've become a big believer in stealth. Yeah, I know. The elk hunters, the deer hunters, anybody shooting a rifle probably knows you got to be quiet, you got to be careful, you don't want to spook your quarry. But the same holds true for birds, especially pressured birds, maybe later in the season. But we've got this partner out there running around looking for bird scent, and he needs to be directed once in a while. The problem is we yell at him, we blow our whistle, and all of a sudden that stealth concept goes out the window. Unless we learn how to handle it with our e-collar. Yeah, here are the things we usually do. We got verbal commands. Maybe you use hand signals of one sort or another. Those are all great. Maybe you use a whistle once in a while. Sometimes none of those are going to work. You want to be quiet. Your dog's too far away. He can't see you. Your e-collar might be able to help. I use mine, just learned the hard way, use mine for a few simple commands that I direct flick with that seem to pay off in many ways. It's also kind of magic. You don't want to show off too much, but it's kind of cool if you're just standing there and you can carefully and discreetly press the right button and your dog changes direction. Woo! Just like that. That's one of the things I do with mine. I have a verbal command and a whistle command and a hand signal for all those things, and so I just overlay other things. Now, I'm not using the stimulation, the shock, at all. But these days, our e-collars have all sorts of other things in their repertoire. The tone is the one I like the most. It's right there. Your dog can hear it because it's right there. Not the beeper, the tone. And then the vibrate function. Both of those together can be used for any number of directions. My friend Jeff Funky uses the vibration as a whoa command in the field. I love that idea, and I'm going to try that next season. I've got 2 beeps of the toned thing for come back to me. I got 8 beeps, just a beep, 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 that will get my dog to change direction. Those are just some of the ways to do it. Like any training, you'll overlay your collar command, if you want to call it that, with verbal and leash and whistle, hands. Drill on that for a while and see what happens. It's kind of useful more often than you might think. Yeah, and you're more stealthy too. Handle It This Week is brought to you by HiVizSights.com. See what you've been missing. They got magnetic, screw attach, and plain barrel sights. Fit most shotguns on the market. They work. That's why Ruger, Smith & Wesson, Benelli, Browning, and Remington all use them as original equipment. There's something for you there, whether you're cross-dominant, you're just trying to focus more, get more information, and take a look at they have a great page on shooting tips as well. So take a look at HiViz sights.com, HiVizSights.com. You might learn something. I know I did. And I learned a lot about the incredible value of accessing private ground. Now, it's not for everybody, but if you are just sick and tired of the other choice